Hey everyone, today I'm going to be walking you through a very simple CAD tutorial using Shapr3D, showing you how you can create your very own print-in-place 3D printable chain link. You can use this stuff for a cosplay build, for just a simple fidget toy that you want to play around with, or even incorporate it into a larger functional mechanical piece. It's a really versatile project and it's really easy to do, so let's hop over to Shapr3D. Without further ado, I'll show you what we're working with. All right, I'm in Shapr3D and I just opened up a new project. Now it's important to note I'm working on an iPad, but you can use whatever machine and operating system work best for you. Shapr works across iPads as well as Mac OS and Windows, so whatever's preferential, whatever you have at your disposal, feel free to use it. And while the UI might look slightly different depending on your machine and version, all the tools are going to translate directly, so no need to worry about that. Now, every time I open a new project in Shapr, I always begin by clicking these three dots at the top and hitting that sync bar. Now, depending on your settings, you can have autosave turned on. It's always a good idea, regardless, to be regularly syncing your project. Now, I'm going to start by giving our project a name, just clicking into that field, and we're going to call it Print in Place Chain Link. Then once we have that established, I'm just going to hit sync this project, and I like to come back there every so often, just clicking those three dots and hitting sync project to make sure everything is up to date. So let's get into the chain link. I'm going to be creating effectively the same shape across three different methods, starting with a version for a beginner who perhaps is unfamiliar with CAD or has very little experience and wants to learn about the software while creating this design, and working up to a faster version of creating the same shape that uses some more advanced tools for those who might already have a baseline understanding of CAD programs like Shapr. Now, I would suggest that you watch through all three versions. I think that one of the strongest, most effective ways to learn a program of any sort is to create the same design in a multitude of ways using a multitude of different tools. It allows you to think about ways to use these tools in conjunction with one another to create new things, and I think it's really beneficial. That being said, if you're here to just create some cool chain link, feel free to scrub ahead. I'll leave timestamps to the more advanced versions of creating this shape. So without further ado, let's get into the sort of beginner way of creating this design. I'm going to start with a sketch on my top plane. And to do that, I'm just going to double tap and open up the sketch field. Now I'm already centered on the origin, so I'm going to click my rectangle tool from the toolbar and just drag out a rectangle. It doesn't matter what the dimensions are off the bat, because we're going to dimension it here manually. So I'm going to click the numerical dimension down here at the bottom, and in that field, I'm going to give this a dimension of 40 millimeters. Just hit the check there. So now this edge, the width of our rectangle is dimensioned. It's set in stone. Unless, of course, we decide to change it later. I'm going to do the same thing with the height over here, clicking into that field, and I'm going to give it a height of 70 millimeters. So we've got a 40 by 70 rectangle now established in 2D space. We can exit our sketching plane, and you'll see that the color inside of that shape is going to change. It's going to become that sort of shaded blue. That signifies that you have a closed sketch and you've created a planar surface. So we can now click into that rectangular sketch and extrude it out into 3D space by dragging this arrow up. And I'm going to extrude our sketch to a height of 10 millimeters. So now we're in 3D space. We've established a polygonal form, and we can work with it to create our chain link. Now, of course, to create that chain link, we need to have a hollowed out interior. This is a solid body right now, and we don't want that. We want to have a hole in the center. So to do that, I'm going to click one of these edges on the top of our rectangle. It doesn't matter which one it is. It can be any edge. And you'll see a series of tools for manipulating things in 3D space pop up on the side of your screen. The one that we're looking for down here is the offset edge chain. You'll notice with many tools in Shapr3D, they'll potentially have a little arrow in the bottom corner. That means that there are multiple versions of the same tool embedded in the program. So for various utilities, if you need to just select, let's say, one edge, you can click the logo for the chain selection, and it'll give you a drop-down menu where you can switch to a single edge. Now you see it's switched to single, and I'm just offsetting the one edge. For our use case, we want that full chain selected. So make sure that you have the full chain selected, and you'll see the whole face highlight in that orange color. And you'll note that both faces that include that edge that you've selected will populate, and then once you start dragging, it'll automatically understand which one you're working with. So I'm just going to grab that arrow and drag in on our top face 10 millimeters. And with that done, you can click the blue arrow, and you can see it turns blue because we've created now two different sketches effectively on this same planar surface. We have the interior of this new rectangle, and then we have this other shape inscribed between the smaller rectangle and the edge of the perimeter. So I'm going to click the interior of that smaller rectangle, and using that arrow, I'm just going to drag down and subtract it out from inside. Now you can see we've got the makings of our chain link. We've got this hollow form, and now, of course, we need to begin rounding it out. So we've got hard, sharp edges that we want to make round. I'm going to start by zooming in and clicking the vertical corner edges of our new shape. So I'm just going to turn, orbiting and panning the view as I go along, selecting all four of these internal edges, and making sure not to select the face, but the edge itself. And if you do select a face, you just tap it again and deselect it. So you can see now I've got all four of those edges highlighted in blue. And now we're going to use a fillet. We're going to round out these corners by just dragging that arrow toward us. And we're going to drag until these edges meet each other and are perfectly tangent, which looks to be happening at 10 millimeters, which is what we should expect based on the dimensions we've given. So now we have the internal component of our chain link rounded out, right? It's looking smooth. It has that sort of almost elliptical shape. And now we need to do the same for the exterior corners. Now, for those who don't know, there's a very simple tool for making sure, or a mathematical principle for making sure that you maintain a consistent thickness around your shape when you're filleting an internal edge and an external one. So we're going to do the same thing, dragging those pieces together. But you'll note that depending on how much you drag, I'm just going to pan to the top view here so you can see closer. Depending on how much you drag, you might get a situation where suddenly the fillet is too strong and you get thinness in those rounded corner points, or the fillet might not be pronounced enough. And now you have these really, really thick corners that just don't look good, and they're using up excess material. We don't want that. Now, thankfully, we've dimensioned our piece in such a way that the math works out pretty cleanly here, but if you're ever in a situation where you don't know how much to fillet your exterior edge, all you need to do is take the fillet that you applied to the internal, which in our case, if we go back and we click one of those and look at our history, you can see it was a radius of 10 millimeters. We filleted 10 millimeters on that internal edge. So you take that number and you add to it the thickness of your piece, the distance between the inside and the outside, which coincidentally also happens to be 10 millimeters, which means that for these exterior edges, we'll select all four of them, we need to fillet 20 millimeters. And when we do that and dragging out to 20, you can see that now suddenly we have a perfectly tangent finish around both edges, and there's a consistent thickness around the entirety of our shape. Now, all that's left to do to finish off our chain link is to round off the top and bottom around the perimeter of our shape. So to do that, I'm going to select one of these top edges, one of the exterior edges, and then same thing on the bottom, grabbing those two, and just pulling that fillet to 5 millimeters. And just like that, suddenly we have ourselves a nice rounded, fully filleted chain link piece that is ready to go, ready to print. Of course, right now, this is just one link, and we need to turn it into a chain. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to pan back to the front view. You can see now we're aligned. We have our piece resting on our top plane. This is actually an important thing to note for anyone who's not particularly familiar with CAD. It can be difficult to get the hang of orbiting and panning and zooming all at the same time and moving around. Oftentimes you might find yourself kind of lost or in a place where you don't know how to orbit back to wherever you need to go. If that's ever happening, just come up to the cube in the top corner of your screen and just double tap it. And when you do that, it will automatically zoom you back to that default loading format where you're at that 45-degree view of all three axes, and you'll be back aligned to the origin. So anytime you get lost, you don't know where you are in space or in your project, just double tap and it'll bring you right back. Okay. So now let's look at turning this link into an extensive chain. To do this, what we need to do is turn our project, turn our piece in 3D space. So right now it's resting flat. Of course, if we were to just create a chain of these, it's not going to, they're not going to link properly. You can see that if we double tap our piece and select the whole thing, and we hit that copy button and then drag out, we can create a chain, but of course, when you 3D print this, that's just going to become one solid piece. What we need to do is make sure that these are turned so that they're not intersecting whatsoever. So coming back to that front plane, I'm going to double tap one of the faces of our piece, and that's going to select the whole body. And then in this orthogonal view, I'm going to use the rotate command and turn this piece 45 degrees. So it's at a perfect 45 from the top plane that it was previously resting on. This is the orientation that we want our piece in. Now I'm going to pan back into 3D space, and I'm going to create a duplicate of this piece that we just created. So let's double tap a face. We'll hit that copy button, and we'll drag it out. And let's say 25 millimeters. How about that? Now, again, we're still in a situation where these pieces are intersecting. They are not creating a free-flowing chain that we want. So what we're going to do is now pan and double tap that second piece, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees back the opposite way. So now it is at a perfect 90-degree perpendicular orientation to our first piece. And now you can see, as you pan around these pieces, that while linked, they're not directly intersecting with one another at any point. Their bodies don't intersect, which means that when they print, they will print as separate pieces, but they will be permanently linked to one another. And so now that's the beginning of a solid chain link. You can work with this, you can print it as is, or you can create an even longer chain. If you want to do that, let's move this piece. We'll double tap and select that secondary piece. And let's drag it out another, let's say 15 millimeters. So it's at 40 millimeters away from the previous orientation. Now what we can do is double tap and select both of these pieces and come over to our toolbar here and select the pattern tool. Now mine is preset to a circular option. You see that subtitle there. And again, it's got that small arrow. So if I click into the logo, we can switch this to a linear pattern, which is what we're looking for. And this is essentially going to create repeating duplicates of whatever body we have selected in a linear chain. And so right now you can see the quantity of duplicates or of total pieces is set to 3, and then the spacing will be defined by whatever spacing we give it. So we're going to drag out, and we had a distance of 40 millimeters on between our first two pieces, which means we're going to want to double that and give a spacing of 80 millimeters overall to the total quantity. Now if we want to adjust that quantity, you can just tap into that field and set it to whatever you like, 5, 10, 15, 100, doesn't matter. It will automatically generate all the pieces for you. And when you're content with it, you just hit done and boom. Now you have a full chain of chain link pieces that is ready for export and printing. So that's the first version. This is sort of the entry level basic way of creating these pieces. Now let's move on to a second, let's say, intermediate version of creating the same design. So we're back in our same project. I'm going to click into the items tab, and I like to keep all my items very organized so that I know what I'm working with and I can always go back and adjust things later as needed. So we've got our linear pattern I'm going to call this chain link 1. And then the sketches inscribed beneath it are related to that original design that we created. Now you can see they have these little eyeballs toggled off, and that's just going to adjust visibility. So as I toggle that on and off, it will automatically hide or unhide sketches, bodies, whatever it may be. And if you click anywhere on the name, it will automatically select and highlight that piece, that sketch, whatever it may be, in your actual workspace. So if you don't know where something's at, you can always come over to your items tab and select it accordingly. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide all of these things, and we're going to come back here and create a new sketch on our top plane. Now for this second version, I want to think about doing things a little bit faster, a little bit more streamlined, using the existing system that we already had. So let's think about the steps that we went through. We drew a big rectangle, and then we hollowed it out. And then from there, we rounded out the edges using fillets to create the rounded form. Well, that works just fine, but if you want to do it even faster, you could just round it out to begin with in the sketch, which is exactly what we're going to do this time. So let's start again with a rectangle. We'll drag it out from the center. Important to note, the rectangle also has a drop-down option where you can drag from the center, from a diagonal point, or from 3 points. So if you're dragging a rectangle and it's starting from one corner going to another, just tap into it and make sure that you're set to a center rectangle. Now again, I'm going to dimension these as we did previously. Let's set it to 40 millimeters down at the base and 70 down at the bottom. So this is the piece that we worked with initially, but it's not the piece that we're going to work with this time. Instead, we're going to round out our sketch to begin with. So I'm going to use this as sort of a ghost template. I don't want this to be real geometry that affects the actual physical 3D form that I create. I just want it to be a reference guide for me. And so what I'm going to do, as you can see, when I go into 3D space right now, this is a selectable planar surface that can become a 3D object. And I don't want that because that's going to influence other sketches that I may create. So what I'm going to do is double tap one of the edges and select the entire sketch. And then in the bottom corner of my other toolbar over here, I'm going to hit Make Construction. It's right under that lock button, Make Construction. And you see that when you select that, suddenly this becomes a series of dashed lines. These dashed lines now, when I exit my sketching plane, do not have that shaded blue space. This is not a solid, selectable, complete planar surface. It will not create a 3D shape. It only serves as a reference guide in the 2D sketch plane that you're working with. So this is a really handy tool anytime you need to draw even just a single line and then turn it into a dimensioned reference or a larger sort of frame like we're working with here. If you ever want to switch it back, it's super easy to just select and hit Make Regular, and that's going to turn it into those solid lines again. But yeah, anytime you see a dashed line like that, that is construction geometry. You can toggle individual pieces on and off, doesn't matter. And this will work across sketches. So now we've got this frame that we've created, and we're going to build our shape inside of it. I'm going to start again with another rectangle, dragging it from the center until it hits that edge, so it's coincident, and you can see it's already now defined as 40 millimeters wide. I'm going to release, and then I'm going to define the height as 30 millimeters. So we've got a solid rectangle inside of a construction one, and you can see when we go into 3D space now, the smaller rectangle that is regular geometry is selectable to extrude, and the construction geometry is not. So let's go back into our sketch. And instead of now extruding out and then creating our fillets and doing all of that in 3D space, we're just going to automatically round the corners in the sketch. And we're going to do that by selecting our circle tool and dragging out a circle starting from the midpoint of the top line of our regular rectangle, just dragging out from here and then waiting for it to snap to the endpoint. And you can see now it's coincident with both the side edges and the top and bottom edge of that construction geometry perimeter. So we'll deselect. We'll use our circle tool again and perform the same operation starting from the midpoint of our bottom edge. Boom. So now we've got two circles and a rectangle inscribed inside of our construction geometry. But all we need is the perimeter shape that they create. We don't need all of this additional stuff. As you can see, if we try to extrude this out right now, if I select any of these, we're going to get all of these weird shapes that coincide and overlap with one another. This is all regular geometry, and so anytime there's a hard edge, it's going to divide the shape into new shapes. We don't want that. We just want one solid elliptical shape defining the perimeter. And so what we're going to do in our sketch plane is select the trim tool, that little pair of scissors. And with the trim tool selected, you just go through and tap any piece that you need to delete. It'll highlight in red and then it'll disappear. And so just go through and select all of the edges that define that sort of internal overlapping mess that we don't need. All that we're trying to preserve are the top and bottom arcs of the circles and the side edges of the perimeter. Now, if on accident you click any edge that you didn't mean to delete, just use those back arrows at the bottom and you'll undo your work. When you're done, select the trim arrow again, and now we have the perimeter that we need. So we can exit our sketch plane, and now we have a defined rounded shape that we can extrude up 10 millimeters and then perform our same operation. We'll select one of those perimeter edges of the top face. Again, it doesn't matter which one. Hit offset edge, go in 10 millimeters, and then extrude that down. Now we've created essentially the same chain link piece without even dealing with the fillets. And you'll see we don't have a defined edge at the top of this rounded piece now because it's not two corner points that are meeting through fillet. It is defined by the circle that we extruded. Now I'm actually going to undo these three steps because, as you may have noted, doing this sort of additional offset edge is equally unnecessary. We can even streamline that as well. In our sketch plane, we can just select one of our solid edges. And if we go into the More on our toolbar between the ellipse and the trim tool, we can do offset chain. And this is going to function the exact same way. We can extrude or offset our sketch. And so we'll do that to the same 10 millimeters. And now when we exit the sketch, we have two different defined planar surfaces that we can extrude. But we just extrude one up and we've saved ourselves the trouble of having to go back through and manually subtract out that additional piece of material. So now we'll just finish it off by selecting some of our edges inside and outside of the top and inside and outside of the bottom. You only need to select one edge for a closed loop like this, and then when you drag the fillet, it will automatically fillet the entire chain. So drag to 5 millimeters, and now we have the same exact piece. We'll go into our front view, and again, it's resting on that surface. So we're going to rotate 45 degrees, just double tapping to select the whole body, and then rotating 45 degrees. We'll double tap again. We'll hit that copy tool and drag out 40 millimeters. And then deselect copy and rotate 90. And now we have the same chain link. Also worth noting here, you saw that when I dragged that piece out after I copied it, before rotating it, I deselected the copy. And you can tell that it's deselected because it's in white. When it's blue, it means it's highlighted, it's activated. When it's white, it's not activated. With the copy tool, whenever you're working with a piece, it will create a copy at every individual separate step that you make if you keep it selected. So if I were to copy this and drag it out to the 40 millimeters that we wanted, and then rotate before I deselect it, it's going to leave a piece at that 40 millimeters, and then it's going to create a third piece here. If I were to drag this again, it's going to create another. If I were to rotate that, it's going to create another. It can get messy really quick if that's not what you're trying to do. So whenever you're using the copy tool, make sure that you hit copy, you perform one action, so drag 40 millimeters, deselect, then perform your next action, unless, of course, you are trying to create multiple copies. Now I'm going to double tap both of these. I'm going to use our linear pattern tool, and again, spacing to 80 millimeters. We're going to create quantity of 5. And now in our items, I'm going to call this chain link 2. And let's drag this over to the right, say 100 millimeters. And then we'll unhide our first chain link, and now you can see are identical pieces. But you might notice that that first version has some additional contour lines, and those are defined by the fillets that we made. So each edge that curved to meet itself at that rounded point created a new edge. We did a top and bottom fillet on both of these, so you can see they both have fillets along the length of themselves. But again, it's only that first version that is going to have a contour line at the top of the curves, because we had to fillet those corners, whereas with our second version, we just created a circular sketch. All right, so now we've essentially created the same identical shape using 2 different methods, and we're going to hop over to a third method that is even faster and more streamlined and uses some new tools that you may or may not have played around with too much in CAD. So I'm going to hop into our items bar, and I'm going to hide both of our existing chain links. I'm going to go back and create a new sketch. It's important to note that since this software is now a parametric modeler, it means that the bodies that you create are linked to the sketches that define them. So what does that mean? If I draw out a rectangle, it doesn't matter the size, and then I extrude it and create a body, that body is now existing in 3D, but it's also still dependent on the history of what created it. So I can manually change the shape of this in 3D, but if I go into my items bar and I select that initial sketch that created this rectangle, and I say, actually, I want that to be 100 millimeters. When I change the sketch, it's going to retroactively change the shape that was extruded from the sketch. So in other words, the bodies you create are dependent on the sketches that defined them. So every time I'm creating a new body, I like to create a new sketch unless I want 2 different things to be linked to the same sketch. Because over here in our history, you can see a full breakdown of every single step we've taken in this process so far. And it gets very angry when you go back and delete things like this. So I'm just going to get rid of those extrusions from that rectangle. And we'll talk more about history and parametric modeling later. But for now, let's hop over to the third version of creating this chain link. So again, toggle into your top plane, create a sketch, starting with our rectangle, except this time we don't want to go 40 by 70. We're going to think about the sketch itself in a slightly different way. So just trust me and follow along here. We're going to go 30 millimeters wide instead of 40 and 30 millimeters tall. So we're just creating a 30 by 30 square. Now that we have that all set, we're going to use our same circle method, and using that circle tool, drag out from the midpoint and create 2 identical circles on the top and bottom. Now we're going to toggle on our trim tool, and we're going to eliminate the interior parts of these circles and the interior lines of that square. Toggle off the trim tool, and now we just have that perimeter that we're looking to use. Now you'll note if I toggle on our previous sketch, this current sketch sits in between the exterior and interior walls of the previous shapes that we've created. And that's done purposefully. It's not just random. It's actually exactly 5 millimeters from the exterior edge and exactly 5 millimeters from that interior edge. And what that means if we hide our previous sketch, so now we're just working with our new one, is that we're not going to extrude this shape in the traditional way. We're going to use it as a path for our chain link to follow. So if you think about the steps we've taken so far, we started with our rectangle, which we extruded up, we cut out the middle, we rounded off the edges, and we created effectively the same shape. Then we skipped past the rounding of the edges by just creating circles in our sketch. Well, what if we skipped past the extrusion component entirely? Instead of moving things upward in 3D and then rounding them off, what if our extrusion was rounded to begin with? So let's exit our sketching plane, and we're going to toggle from the top view to the front view. So now that shape that we've created is just going to look like a straight line. And we'll create a new sketch on this front plane, and you'll see 3 points defined here: the midpoint and the exterior-most point of each edge of the width of our shape. We're going to grab our circle tool, and on either one of those exterior points, we're going to drag out from it and make a circle that is 10 millimeters in diameter. Now we exit our sketching plane, and let's zoom out and see what we're working with here. 2 sketches, one defining the path and one defining the shape of the body that we're going to extrude. And if we toggle on that previous sketch, you can see that the circle we've created is exactly the diameter of our previous chain links. Except now, toggle off that sketch, it's already rounded for us. We don't have to worry about fillets or anything like that. So what we'll do is go into our tools panel in 3D space, and we're going to use the sweep command. Now the great thing about Shapr3D is that if you aren't familiar with any given tool, whenever you select one, it's going to pop up this little bar at the top. And if you click into that, it'll give you a short tutorial on how to use every single tool. So if you're not familiar with it, please go through and watch all these tutorials as you go along. They're really, really helpful references. The way that the sweep tool works is it takes a 2D shape and extrudes it along another 2D path. So let's select the shape that we want to extrude, being the interior of this circle, not the edge itself, mind you, but the interior of the circle. And then the path that we want to extrude along, well, that's this edge, this arc, this edge, and then this arc. And once we've selected all 4 of those, we'll just hit done. And suddenly we have the same chain link shape. We can go into our items tab and toggle off both of these sketches. And now we've got a solid body. And you'll notice, compared to the other two, it doesn't have any of those contour lines, except for the ones that define the edge between our cylinders and the halves of the toruses that we've created. Because it was just one solid extrusion. There were no fillets, whether it be on the corners or along the top and bottom. It was rounded to begin with. So now we'll toggle into our front view. We'll double tap and do our same 45-degree turn. And then we'll come out to 3D space, double tap again, copy it, 40 millimeters. Again, deselect copy before you do your 90-degree rotation. And now we have our 2 interlinked chains. We'll double tap both of them. We'll use our linear pattern tool, extruding out 80 millimeters with a quantity of 5. Hit done, and we will call this chain link 3. We'll move this one over. Let's go 200 millimeters. And now you can see when we unhide these, we have created the same shape 3 different ways, each time using progressively more tools, getting progressively faster, and creating a progressively cleaner shape that does not use as many contour lines, does not have as many faces, It was more simple and refined as we go along. But again, always creating the same exact piece. Now, the really cool thing about parametric modeling, for those who want to take this a step further, let's hide chain links 1 and 2. And let's unhide sketch number 5. We only need sketch number 5 here. Sketch number 5 was our little circle that defined the extent of the shape that we'd be extruding in 3D. Remember how I said that the bodies you create are defined by the sketches that create them? Well, we have our bodies over here, not just this first one, but this entire chain. Because every single one of these links is a duplicate of this original one. And if this original one is dependent on the parameters of our little circle sketch, well, then this little circle sketch defines basically everything about our chains. So if we click our little circle and we change that number from 10 millimeters to 15, look what happens to our links. They themselves progressively thicken because we changed that diameter in real time. We can do the same thing the opposite way. Let's go down to 5 millimeters. Now suddenly we've got nice thin chains. And you can do this for not just the circle itself. Let's go back here. If we unhide our previous sketch, what if we select this sketch and we shrink it down? You can see the chains moving in real time according to the adjustments that we make. So I'm going to undo that, but feel free to play around with this. Parametric modeling is super fun, and it saves you a lot of time when you're looking to make consistent symmetrical changes across a large number of bodies without having to manually go through and say, okay, let's make this one a little bit larger, and then let's make this one a little bit larger. Instead, just reference the sketches that you created to begin with. So once you're happy and you've got the piece that you want to create, then you can come up to those 3 dots at the top, again, making sure your project has been regularly synced, and then hit this export button and export in whatever format you like. For 3D printing, I would recommend 3MF. You could use a step format. You can use an STL. These are not information-heavy files because the shapes are pretty basic, so it shouldn't be larger than a megabyte or 2 at the most. If you want to push this design even further, see if you can play around with rotating some of these chains and creating a closed loop of chains. I think you should be able to figure out how to do that, but I will certainly create some more tutorials in the future going more in depth with designs like this. And then follow along. Send me any pictures you have of designs that you create using this particular tool. I thought it was just a really fun and simple sort of intro piece. And it's pretty useful for a lot of designs. The chains that I've made actually hold up pretty well. Because you're printing it at 45 degrees, I've found that they're actually pretty difficult to break if you're just pulling along the chain itself. So I've actually used them in several mechanical pieces that I've created. And depending on your 3D printer, let's go to the front view here, you can see this is the bed of your printer. It's going to be creating layer by layer these pieces resting at 45 degrees. What I've found is that this particular design really does not require supports, assuming that you're printing small enough pieces. If the chains you're creating are really, really massive, then the bridge at the top of each piece is, you might get a little bit of sagging there in your print. But otherwise, I found you really don't need supports, although I would recommend printing with some sort of raft at the bottom because each chain is just going to start with a very thin layer of filament, and that can be difficult to balance. So if you print with a raft, that will give your whole print a little bit more stability, and then it's really easy to just pop off of the bed and you're good to go. So let me know down below if this tutorial was helpful. If it was, I'd certainly be interested in making more of these. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one.